I think you can all hear me now. All right. Okay. Good morning. I the microphone wasn't properly plugged, but that has been sorted now. Good morning and welcome to the NGO Masterclass this morning. And for those of you who are just joining us, my name is Vincent Ogoro. I'm excited to have you join the session this morning. I apologize for not being able to hold it last week and sending out a very late cancellation notice. It just couldn't happen because I was on the road throughout Saturday, so we didn't have the time to be able to set up and hold it. So you're welcome to the masterclass, and um, I can see quite a number of us here. I really appreciate you for taking the time to join us on Saturdays, knowing that Saturdays are never easy. So today we want to talk about risk management. That's what we're going to be looking at today. We're looking at risk management. So that's a little about me there. Okay. Somebody says they still can't hear me. Please, before we go ahead, can you all have the same problem? If you can't hear me, please do let me know. Can you hear me now? What's the experience like? Okay, it is echoing. All right, let me see.
Okay, is it better now? Is it better now? Or is still echoing?
No, it's better. We can hear you now. It's better.
All right. Thank you. So I've got to remove the headset. All right. Okay, thank you for that feedback. Appreciate everyone. Okay, great. So let's just go ahead. Now we want to look at risk management. And we are all living in very turbulent times. As you can see, every one of us is going to be experiencing one form of risk or the other in our lives, in our organizations, in our projects. So, we're joking one time and we're saying that, look, just living in Nigeria is a risk on its own. So you must know how do you manage the risks that you face, that your projects are going to be experiencing, because whether you like it or not, all projects carry some level of risk. And it's very important that you know how to manage them, because if you don't know how to manage the risk, the projects may fail. And as we get on, and just like us to look at this quote by William Shedd, he said, "A ship is safe in the harbor, but that is not what a ship is built for." And the harbor is safe. The harbor is where you dock your ship. The ship is not moving, and there's no wave, no tide that can sink that ship. Okay, it's there, it's been chained, or rather, it's been anchored, in the harbor, so it's not going to be moving. But the ship has got to move, and moving in, especially in uncharted territories, are often very insecure. So you could be exposed to pirates, you could be exposed to shipwreck. If your ship is not very strong, the amount of winds can just destroy. So many things could happen, and then you may get shipwrecked and then ultimately sink. That's how project management is. Project management is like that. And you are safe when you're not managing projects. If you don't have any projects, you're safe. There are no risks. But then, what is an NGO without a project? You can't call yourself a development or humanitarian professional when you do not have a project that you're working on, in whatever form that you're providing services on that project, whether you are a field implementer or whether you are in the office providing support. wherever position we find ourselves, we're providing incredible services for our participants, beneficiaries, and affected population. But working in the field has a lot of risks. I mean, look at what's happening in Nigeria with the whole insecurity that is happening around us. That's risk on its own. So some of us operate in very risky, hostile environment where it's prone to the highest level of risk that you can think of, prone to kidnapping, insecurity. We talk about bandits, talk about the Boko Haram, insurgents, and all manner that we hear about today. So risk management draws our attention to the steps that we can take either as an organization or as a project to begin to manage those risks. Because as you see, we are going to have organizational risks as well, and then we also have project risks. And for those of us who've ever written a proposal or contributed to a proposal, or if you've come across a proposal, you're going to see that in the design stage of the project, donors are very particular about risk management. They want to know what your risk management framework is, or what your risk management plan is, and what are the various risks that you are encountering on the project, and how you intend to manage such risk. So this is why I felt that it's important as project managers or as people who work within the project environment to understand risk management, especially for those of us in Nigeria with risks that are coming up daily, risks that were not risks before. We're now waking up to different stories in the news and all. And so it's very important for us to prepare for these events before they actually happen. Now, before we go on, I'd just like to open a discussion, and I'd like every one of us here to send your answers in a chat. And remember that there are no wrong answers. There are no wrong answers. So everyone has to contribute. What is a risk? I like to get responses. What is a risk? What do you understand by the concept or the term risk? As we move on. Okay. Yeah, thank you for those who have. Okay. Thank you, Paul. A possibility of something bad happening. Thank you. Ishmael, anticipated setback. Thank you. More responses, more responses, more responses, everyone. Just share your thoughts on what you understand by risk. I mean, today we're looking at risk management, and so we want to know, what is a risk? Yeah, Adiola, factors that can hamper achievement of set goals and objectives. Thank you. Thank you. Any other response? Any other response? You've been hearing risks, you've been managing risks, you've been dealing with risks. So what do you understand by the term risk? Any other person? Thank you, Hannah. Uncertainties that can pose a threat to project implementation. Thank you. Thank you. Favor, thank you. A factor that can affect the success of a project implementation. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, so I'll just wait for one more response and then we can go ahead. Any final comment on what a risk is? Thank you, Mrs. Menkiti. Thank you, Paul and Beatrice. Anything that can disrupt your project, exposure to danger in any situation, negative and undesirable consequences that we expect. All right, thank you also very much for those responses. Now, you're all correct. There is not one agreed definition about what a risk is, but it's important that we realize that a risk is an uncertain event, factor, or condition that could adversely affect the outcome of an activity or intervention. So a risk is something that is uncertain. It has a probability of occurring, and if it does occur, okay, somebody says it can be negative or positive distraction. Yeah, so some people talk about positive risk and as well as negative risk. Okay, but I want us to focus on this definition that a risk is an uncertain event, factor, or condition that could adversely affect the outcome of an activity or intervention, the outcome of a project, the outcome of an intervention that could even affect an organization if it occurs. That's what a risk is. A risk has not occurred yet. A risk is something that you're not even sure if it's going to happen, but there is a likelihood that it is going to occur. And if it does occur, then it's going to have, an effect, or it may have an effect on your project, the result of your project, and even your organization's existence can be threatened by risks as well. Now, there are three principal sources of risk. There are three principal sources of risk. So you have programmatic risks now. These are risks that are under the project control, things that the project is doing, okay? Factors that are under the project control. Maybe you didn't design your project properly. It could be that you didn't carry out an effective project plan. It could also be that you were not managing resources properly. There's poor performance. Anything that should, that is within the control of the project, but where it was perhaps neglected and it now became a risk, or something that was left out, ignored, or not properly handled, and it could be a risk for you now. So you have principal sources of risks. One, there are risks that are caused by the project itself. Planning, design, implementation, resources of that project could pose a risk on the project. So maybe you are having staff attrition. It could pose a risk on the project. So those are factors that are under the project's control. Now, you also have factors, that are causing risks that are in the wider environment, which are only controllable by decision makers elsewhere. So this could be from government, maybe local government, from state government, from the federal government. Maybe there is a change in government. Maybe you've been working for, some of you are working around policies, and then you've been partnering or working with a particular government from a particular political party. And just imagine that you started implementation of the project, you've done courtesy calls, you've really gone to do a lot of advocacy visits, and then the governor or the local government chairperson or the senator or the legislator generally was removed by the court. They went to the court to challenge the result of the election, and he or she lost out. And that poses a risk because the new person who is coming will not have known you. And then you're going to want to start all over again, to start these negotiations, to start this advocacy, because whenever there is a change in government, they want to change everything around government. So there are going to be a lot of posting out and posting in, reshufflement, replacements, and all that. And that could cause a lot of, present some risks for you. There are other times whereby there is a lack of political will. You know, there are risks that are as a result of lack of political will by office holders. And then some of us are experiencing risks around institutional issues. Maybe there are weaknesses with regards to the institution itself that we are working with, even within our organization. So we lack system strengthening, or the establishments where we are working with on for that project also has some systemic weaknesses that are institutional. And that becomes a problem, or it poses or presents some risks that you need to face. And then you have factors that are essentially uncontrollable. So these are things that we in Nigeria we say is the will of God. Okay, so some people say, it's God that willed it. Say there is a natural disaster, there is flood. For instance, you have this pandemic, okay, that came in. You have pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic that swept across the entire world. You know, that is something that is essentially uncontrollable. So it's outside of your scope. There's nothing you can do about it. There's nothing Nigeria can do about it. I mean, it's beyond one country intervening. You could also have political instabilities. Look at what is happening in neighboring countries in Africa. A lot of coup d'etat, you know, forcefully changing power, removing presidents and prime ministers and taking over powers. And then we have, you could also have things like the exchange rates. Look at what's happening with the Naira. These are things that you can't control, your organization cannot control. Even Nigeria, unfortunately, is unable to control them because we've been looking and we're seeing that these things are still there. As a result of COVID-19, we're now having global inflation. We're experiencing global inflation. Interest rates are soaring. And these are some of the challenges that you deal with. And these are some of the factors, I beg your pardon, factors that present risk for you as a person, for your project, and for your organization. And so it's very important that you know this as well. Now, risks are usually not known. So they are usually at least partially unknown. There are things that you may not have thought about it. Like I always tell people, nobody saw COVID-19 coming, not the prophets, not the religious leaders on 31st night. There were a lot of prophecies. Nobody saw it coming. I mean, not even the scientists. There are no predictions. Nobody caught it. It took everybody, even the most prepared countries that have the best public health systems, that have been preparing for pandemics over the decades, were caught unprepared. And another thing that you need to understand again is that risks change with time. And so there could be risks today, and then tomorrow there are no more risks. Okay, so you can find out that something could be a risk today, and then tomorrow there are no more risks. You know, or they've changed, or the level with which you are thinking that they're going to occur, they're not going to occur that way again. And then risks are always manageable in the sense that action may be taken to change their impact. The essence why we're doing risk management today is that so that you can do something about the risks that you've identified. The essence why you're diagnosing the risks is so that you can do something about it. So you can take certain action to change the impact of the risk. You may not be able to end it, to eliminate it, but you may reduce the impact. Or you may do something to ensure that if the risks do occur, they don't affect your project, your organization, your operations, the way they ought to have affected you or impacted you if nothing was done about it. And risks exist in the future tense, okay? They have not occurred in the past, neither have they occurred. When something has happened before, it is no more a risk. When something has happened now, it is not a risk. That is an issue that you have to deal with. But a risk is something that has not yet occurred. So you're thinking about it and you're expecting that it's going to occur. And finally, risks exist in all projects. There is no project that is immune to risk. There is no project, no matter how small or large, that is immune to risk. There is no organization that is immune to risk. So you have to accept that look, risk exists in all projects. Risks exist in all organizations. Now, the level of risk that would occur in your project would now be determined by your risk appetite. There are some of us, if you look at the picture here that I've inserted here, I do not have the capacity to gamble, okay, or to play casino. There are people who have this adrenaline rush whenever they see these things. There are people who have a high risk appetite. I don't have that. There are some of us who can do that, who can be in this environment, and it's nothing. So they could lose money and they are not perturbed. Okay, so there are organizations like that who may not be interested really in managing all the risks because, well, they have a huge risk appetite. They can accept anything. But for us starting out, it's very important that we learn how to manage them. We don't just allow things and leave it like we always do in Nigeria and say, look, God has willed it to happen. I mean, if you bring that mentality into your project with donor funds, it's really going to cost us a lot. So it's very important that we understand how we manage this risk. Now, in managing your risk, there are 5 steps that you need to take. So the first step is that you need to identify and all the risks, and then you need to categorize them. You need to do a risk assessment of their probability and then the impact of occurring. And you also need to develop a response strategy. And then finally, you need to monitor and control the risk. So we're going to talk about each of these steps or approaches that you can use to manage the risk one after the other. We're going to look at each of them now and see what needs to be done or what steps that we all can take in managing this risk. So let's look at risk identification. But before we move on, if there is any question, if you've got any question you want to ask, or you have any contribution you want to make, you can just raise your hand and I will mute you, or you can share your thoughts as send it in as a chat. So I'll read it out, and if it requires explanation, and we will all share or contribute, because I do know that a number of us here are very experienced in risk management as well. Okay, so now I'd like to find out what are the major risks in your project. What are some of the risks that you have in your project or your organization? What have you identified recently as part of the risk analysis? What are some of the risks that you think may affect your project, may affect your work in the near future? You can just say, you can just type your responses, please. What are the major risks of your project? Any examples? It may not be your project, but yeah, okay, someone, okay, thank you, Hannah. Security challenges, changes in government policies, security issues regarding bandit attacks, okay. Thank you, okay, elections, yeah, elections. Inadequate funding. Inflation, we're having serious, yeah, unfriendly government officials, kidnapping of development workers, climate change, change in government and policy, especially at the local government bureaucracy, Fantastic. Fantastic. So these and many more, okay, lack of buy-in by key stakeholders. So these and many more can also really affect our projects in many ways. They can really affect our projects. So it's very important that you think about how you manage these risks that you have identified, your attitude of health workers, okay? All right. Any other one? Lack of political will by government. Okay. All right. So now risk identification is about determining all the risks that are likely to affect a project and then documenting their characteristics in an understandable way. So when you're identifying the risks, you are brainstorming, you are trying to look at what are the risks that are likely to affect our project. Remember that risks have not occurred, and so there's a likelihood that they may occur. And you would also be looking at a lot of data, comparing information. There has to be evidence that this is something that is going to affect your project, you know. So it's important that you think about it and you allow people to brainstorm, especially people who are going to be carrying out the work. It's very important that their voices are heard during this brainstorm. Okay, so we have community lack of community ownership of projects, delays in government passing relevant bills into law, such as the child protection and then violence against persons, the VAP law. So even though Nigeria is signatories to some of these, we have still not been able to domesticate them in our states, and even for some at the national level. So these are risks that many of us face in our projects, you know, that affect us, affect the work that we do. So it's important that you also need to ask. Remember, one of the things about project management is that it is very participatory, and you have to be open to allow other people with their ideas to come in, because there is nobody that has a monopoly of knowledge. Okay, so if you'll be amazed what you will learn when you always create this opportunity for brainstorming for people, especially the team members, not the project managers, not the leaders, but team members within the project itself or within your organization. If you allow room for them to share their own thoughts, you'll be amazed at what you will learn from them. And so once you've categorized, or once you've identified your risks, it's important that you categorize them. You want to categorize all the risks that you've identified. And for instance, this is just for training purposes. So you have a category here under the risk area. So you have one of the categories that we have when you're talking about kidnapping, banditry, Boko Haram, all that is under security. And so, yeah, when you're talking about security, you're talking about either violence or you're talking about crime, you know, terrorism and all that. They fall under security. So you'll be talking about kidnapping. You're talking about, here in Nigeria, we talk about banditry. We're talking about insurgencies. You're talking about terrorism, and all those things are under security. All that we think about, where we cannot travel by road, we can't travel by train. You go to some parts of the country, they tell you have to stay indoors, you cannot move. These are all security challenges that we are dealing with, and they are all risks. So whenever you are designing a project or you have a project office or you have a project within those environments, it's important to begin to think about what are the risks that we face and begin to categorize them. So after listing the risks, you have to put them into their various categories. We have another category here like safety. So here you're talking about road accidents, fire and office, building collapses. I mean, look at what we saw in the news these past days. Okay, so I went to CNN just to check, and there's a report there to talk that the study has shown that up to 1,000 high-rise buildings in Lagos are prone to collapse. So imagine you living in that environment, working in that environment, and the risks that you're going to face because of the nature of the soil with which people are building on. And so you also have what we call fiduciary risk. So here you're talking about fraud, you're talking about theft, you're talking about bribery. You're talking about bribery. People divert aid materials, local officials. I mean, we work in Nigeria, and you see what goes on. You can't enter any government office. They expect you to grease their palms. They expect you to bribe them for things that they ought to do. That is their responsibility and legitimate duty to do. They ask for bribes. Then we have misallocation of resources. We've had times where NGOs in Nigeria have been blacklisted because they misallocated those resources. They use resources that were meant for projects for their own personal enrichment, and some of them married, other took other wives, some collected chieftaincies, some send their children abroad for school, and all these things that happen. But you wrote to a donor telling them that you're going to do an activity. But what we're seeing is that there is misallocation, and there's that the risk is still there, that there are tendencies that if people do not have a lot of compliance systems within their organization, there's a tendency for us to abuse offices and misappropriate resources. Then you also have risks around information, whereby you have data loss, data breach, data misuse. Okay, people sell personal data information, sell sensitive information. They are posting it on social media and all that. And then we also have another category here around legal and compliance. We have violations of laws and regulations. I mean, this is something that happens a lot in Nigeria. People violate laws from government down to ordinary citizens. There's that tendency or the likelihood that a law may be violated or may not even be respected, or the law may not even exist in the first place. And then you also have reputational risks. Here you're talking about action, information, or perception damaging to integrity or credibility. So people publish in Nigeria, and I was sharing last week, I was telling people that, look, in Nigeria, you are proven guilty, you are guilty until proven otherwise. It's not the other way around. I mean, the law says that everybody is innocent until proven guilty. But the way Nigeria operates may be like everybody is guilty until proven innocent. Because people do not care to hear your own side of the story. They're just running to town with their perspective or whatever information they hear about you. And they just go ahead, they publish, blackmail you, and do all sorts to you, your hard-earned reputation. And people just write stories, publish it, without you having the opportunity to share your own side. And then your reputation is gone. And then you may also have operational risk. Okay, so where you have the inability to achieve project objectives. So this could be as a result of human error, lack of capacity from your staff, from personnel, or maybe the money wasn't there for you to actually carry out the work and so on. So these are some of the things that you may have. So it's very important that after you have identified the risks, you need to come and now put them into the categories to say, is this a security risk? Is this a safety risk? Is this a fiduciary risk? Is this an environment risk? and economic risks. There are lots and lots. These are just a few examples, and this is not all the example that there is about categories of risks, but this just shows us that for every risk that you've identified, you need to think about which category do these risks fall into. Do we have any questions, comments, or any observations you want to make as we go forward? Any questions, any comments, any observations that anybody wants to make as we go forward? Okay, so just as I'm now assuming that there is no comment or observation. All right. Now, okay, so if you want to identify the risks, one of the ways to do that is by conducting one-on-one interviews with managers and relevant staff in your organization. So you want to look at people who you feel will be able to share. So you ask them individually to share what their thoughts are about the risks that the organization is dealing with, or the risks that the project may face. Okay. And while a lot of times, because of donor requirements, we often identify risks when we're writing proposals, it's very important that you move beyond that. That risk management does not just end when you're writing proposal, but it's something that continues as long as the project is going on. Even during planning, even during implementation of that project, you need to begin to think about. Yeah, Dr. Ramatu, yeah. So somebody says, what about the issue of people agitating for the separation of Nigeria? Example, Biafra. Absolutely. I mean, I just came back from the Southeast on Thursday, and it's not easy. I know that we have people joining us here who are also, everybody is facing a risk. There is no CSO, there is no NGO, there is no business that is going to operate there that will not factor that issue in now. Okay, they have to factor that in as part of their risk management, because, for instance, for most of the time, the past months, Mondays have been declared sit at home, even though it's not from the government. But there are consequences when you go out on the streets on Monday. So people do not work on Mondays. Schools do not open on Monday. So assuming you don't realize that, and you're not doing a risk assessment, you run into troubles if you set up a meeting on Monday. People may not show up for that meeting. So it's very important that you also realize that as well. So it's critical for you to think about that. Now, in identifying your risks, you can do that by conducting a one-on-one interview with managers and relevant staff across the organization. People, you meet them individually and let them share, or you develop questionnaires or want to deploy to them and say, okay, take a few moments to share what you feel are the risks that we are facing on this project. Now, you can also identify risks by organizing workshops. Okay, so you want to organize workshops with your managers, with the staff, but this workshop has to be facilitated by someone who is knowledgeable on risk management, so that he or she will be able to ask the right questions, because you want to be able to ask the right questions for these. So that's the key. So you have a workshop that is facilitated, and then together everybody brainstorms. So this is not something that one person will do, but it's something that the entire organization is going to be involved in. So everybody brainstorms and their ideas are shared, and we all go ahead again to talk about how to manage this risk. And this is usually done either when the workshop setting is usually done, either when you're writing a proposal or when you're developing a strategic plan. Because as part of maybe the SWOT analysis, the strength, weakness, what's the other now? Opportunities and threats analysis. So when you're doing your SWOT analysis, you can begin to talk about the risk analysis, because even as an organization, it's important to have a risk management framework. You need to know what are the risks that the organization is facing in terms of sustainability, in terms of the circumstances and environment where we work, especially for those of us in the Northeast, and the Northwest. Now, you need to think, it's important to know the risk assessment. You need to have a risk management framework, not just for your project, but for your organization, so that you don't have a situation whereby your staff are kidnapped and then you're now calling you to come and pay ransom, or your staff are exposed. And we've seen cases where development and humanitarian professionals are killed, and they are caught up in the crossfire, whereby we are not supposed to be in the middle. We're not supposed to be caught up, but we are more and more now, we are being endangered. So part of your risk management is going to talk about the security risks that your organization is facing. So it's very important that, so when you do that, you have to be organizing workshops for that kind of situation. When you want to brainstorm on your risks, you need to organize a workshop in that instance. Now, after you've identified the risks, the next thing I want us to talk about is, how do you write your risks? Remember, like I said, that a risk is a potential. A risk has not occurred, okay? It's a possibility. It is not an actuality. It has not occurred, okay? So if something has happened, it is no more a risk. It is now an issue that you must deal with. And so when you're talking about risks, when you're describing risks, there is a language that you need to use. So your language need to reflect the elements of potentiality and uncertainty. You need to be able to show that this thing has not occurred, but that there is a likelihood that it is going to occur. And when it does occur, or if it does occur, there may be an impact, or what other people call consequence. The consequence, that there is going to be a consequence if it does occur. Now, so examples that I've just listed below, as you can see, is that failure to effectively manage the organization's financial resources, which may lead. So you have to use words like may, might, could, things that talk about a probability of something happening. If you use words like can, must, should, it means that it is no more a probability, but there is a certainty that the risk is going to occur, because it's not all risks that you've identified that are going to occur. So it's important that you factor in that probability statement. That probability factor is very, very key. And then another example that we have here is that inadequate compliance systems in place may result to donors' loss of trust or donors' mistrust. So there is that word there, may, showing you that it's not cast in stone. It could happen, and then it could also not happen. And then we also have the third example there is inability to adequately resource programs, which may have a potential impact on our reputation. So I didn't structure that sentence correctly. So you're talking about an uncertainty. You're talking about a potential occurrence. So when you're writing your risk statement, you have to use words that reflect that potentiality or uncertainty. Don't use words that shows you for a fact that this is going to occur. If we knew for a fact that COVID-19 was going to occur, then the pandemic would not have happened, because it would not have left China, or I beg your pardon, there is no, I don't even know if that's where the first that's where it originated from. But if we knew for a fact that COVID-19 was going to happen, but people saw that it was going to occur, so many countries of the world may not have been affected the way they were affected. You know, people would not have died the way people died, because global public health experts and scientists and doctors would have rose up to the occasion and, you know, caught that virus before it had the capacity to spread the way it did. So it's very, very important, the choice of words that you use. How you write your rich statements is critical. You know, think about it. Always know that when you're talking about a risk, it has not happened. So it's very important, have that at the back of your mind, that when we are talking about risk, risk is not something that occurred yesterday. Risk is not something that happened. Risk is something that has not yet happened. It has a probability of occurring. It has a likelihood that it's going to occur. And then it has some impact or consequences if it does occur on our project. So that's one way to look at it. Now, after you've identified and categorized the risks, the next thing that you want to do is to do a risk assessment to prioritize your risk, and then to also identify the risk tolerance. Now, when you're looking at prioritizing the risks, you need to look at ranking these risks based on their probability and their impact. You need to prioritize, because not all risks are going to have any impact on your project, and not all risks have a high probability of them occurring. And you also do not have all the, a blank check. You do not have unlimited resources, and so you cannot use all your resources for risk management. You must prioritize. When you have limited resources to spend for risk management, you cannot use everything to now go and be handling risks. So it's very important. It's very, very important that you think about how to prioritize your risks. And by prioritizing your risks, you're now going to rank them using what we call a risk assessment matrix. I'm going to show you the risk assessment matrix later. And after you prioritize the risks, the next thing that you also want to do is to identify the risk tolerances. Now, in project management, when we say tolerance in project management is tolerance in project management means the performance limit to which you as a project manager can exercise autonomy on that project. So what that means is that there are certain things that are outside of your authority level. There are certain decisions that you cannot take on your own. In the organization, in the project, there are certain decisions you cannot take. I mean, for all of us here, there are we are at different levels in our NGO careers. Some of us are at senior management level, some of us are at middle management level, some of us are still not at management level. We are still starting. And then there are also people at the board level. There are founders, there are country directors, and so on. There are executive directors and directors, chief of parties, and so on. Now, the level of authority that this category of persons have differ. You cannot, because you are a project manager who claim to have the same authority as a chief of party, the same authority as an executive director. It's not possible. So you need to understand that even in managing risks, there are certain risks that are going to be beyond your authority level to even handle. And so it's very important that when you've done a risk assessment, you need to ask yourself that, is this risk within our authority level? Can we take decisions on this risk, at our authority level? Within our level, do we have the authority to work on this risk? Or do we need to escalate this risk to the next level? Because there are going to be some risks that are bigger than you, bigger than your position. Even when you have a solution for them, you do not have the authority to carry out that solution. because your tolerance level is below that particular risk. So it's important that for every risk that you've identified, you need to ask yourself, do we have the capacity, do we have the authority to do anything about this risk, to respond to this risk? Okay, so that's very critical, for you to know. You need to ask yourself, is this risk within our tolerance level? Is there anything that we can do about it? Or is there someone whom we should be discussing with about this particular risk? It's not every risk that you can handle. And just because you know the solutions to all the problems does not mean that you can go ahead and solve those problems. I always tell people that just because you have the solution does not mean that you can solve it. So allow it for people whose authority level, whose capacity, whose tolerance level it is for them to carry it out. So that's these are the things that you're going to be doing assessment. You're going to be, doing like an analysis, trying to prioritize the risks. Each of these risks that you've identified and categorized, you need to analyze them and say, okay, is this risk going to have a high probability or a low probability or a medium probability of occurring, or is this risk going to have a high impact, a low impact, and so on. So that will now determine how you respond to each of the risks. Because after the risk assessment, the next thing that you need to do is to think about, how do we respond? How do we manage it? It is when you respond to it that you are managing. So you want to think about, how are we going to manage each of these risks that we have identified? Now, what you're looking at now is the risk assessment matrix. Now, for each risk I've identified, like I said earlier, you're going to rank them based on their probability and potential impact. So here we have 3 levels: low probability of the risk occurring, medium probability of the risk occurring, and high probability of the risk occurring. So you also have low impact, medium impact, high impact. So for instance, you take let's say we talk about elections. Let's say Anambra elections, for instance. So we ask ourselves, what's the probability that there may be violence in Anambra elections? Assuming we're analyzing this election before now, because the election is already ongoing, so we can no longer do a risk assessment. So maybe that will now determine whether we want to stay within Anambra today, or want to tell want to shut down our office till maybe next week. So you want to ask yourself, what's the probability that there may be violence in Anambra elections, or as a result of Anambra elections today in Oka or in Onitsha? And then you can say it's a low probability, okay, that all the candidates signed peace accord, so it's a low probability, or a medium probability, or because IPOP has said that they've lifted the 1 week sit at home. So those are that's the way you discuss with your team. It's not something that you alone would need to do. No, it has to be something that everyone needs to brainstorm. So you want to compare these risks effectively and provide a proactive perspective on how you're going to be responding to them. So you look at the impact in terms of how will this, if these risks occur, how will it impact our schedule, your work plan? How will it impact the cost of the project? How will it impact the performance of the project in terms of staff? How will it impact the resources that we have for this project? That is the way to consider. You don't just say, okay, what impact will it have? No, impact in terms of what? Impact in terms of your scope, impact in terms of the cost, impact in terms of the time that you should originally be spending on that project. So it's very important that you look at it in this way. Now, I found a table from a guide I saw for as I was researching, just trying to add more material on this on the slide. I stumbled on a document from is a risk management guide from the United Nations. It's just a small document, 46 pages. So it's something that you can read. So I just saw a simple table that they use in developing a risk management framework for their projects. So it just shows you, yeah, look at it now, how you can assess the probability of a risk occurring. Now, before you begin to say the risk is low probability, medium probability, there has to be, you know, like some considerations that you're going to put in place. For instance, what we call probability is what they call likelihood level. So you know, based on what I'm saying there, we'll also look at it as the probability level. What is the probability level of this risk? So is it a remote chance? So anything about remote chance and improbable will fall under our low probability in the matrix I just showed you. Now, for example, they say when something has a remote chance of occurring, it means that it may occur only in exceptional circumstances, typical frequency once every 500 years or more, likelihood over 4 years, over 5-year period is greater than 0.005. That is, there is a 1 in 20,000 chance. That's where you can say that this thing has a remote chance of occurring. Now, if there is if the probability of the thing occurring is improbable, then here you are looking at it is not expected. Oh, I thought, can you not see this table? Hello, please.
Well, I can see it now. I can see it now.
Okay. All right. So I said, okay. So the remote chance, in terms of this likelihood level, what they call likelihood level is what we call probability. Now, if you want to use the assessment matrix I showed you earlier that talks about low probability, medium probability, and high probability. So based on this table now, the remote chance and improbable will fall under low probability, that there is a low probability that this thing is going to occur. So here, if something is improbable, if it has an improbable chance of occurring, here you say it is not expected to occur, no recorded incidents or evidence, there is very little opportunity or reason or means to occur, and maybe the typical frequency is once every 100 years, and the likelihood over a 5-year period is 1 in 2,000 chance. So here you talk about low probability. When within these two rows here, this remote chance and improbable row, here you're talking about low probability of a risk occurring. Now let's look at the medium probability. Let's look at the medium probability. For something to have a medium probability of occurring, here you look at possible, the third row, possible. So here, for something to have a medium probability of occurring, it may occur at some time, few or infrequent recorded incidents or evidence, there is some opportunity or reason or means to occur, the typical frequency once every 20 years, likelihood of occurring, okay, the likelihood over a 5-year period is greater than 0.5%. So there is 1 in 200 chance of this thing occurring. That is a medium probability level. Now you have probable. So under the probable, you have likely to occur. You will also have regular recorded incidents and strong evidence that it could occur and will probably occur in many circumstances. Typical frequency once every 5 or 7 years. The likelihood over a 5-year period is there is greater than 5% chance, that is 1 in 20 chance of these risks occurring. And then you also have the almost certain. The almost certain is that it is likely to occur or reoccur, high level of recorded incidents and strong evidence, typical frequency every 5 years or less, likelihood over 5 years is greater than 50%. So there's 1 in 2 chance. So I would say, okay, remote chance, improbable, remote chance and improbable will fall under low probability of occurring, while possible will fall under medium probability of occurring, and then probable and almost certain will fall under high probability of occurring. So it's a table that just helps you before you begin to say the probability is low. Then what are the evidence? How did you know the probability is low? So this table helps you to be able to check the probability examples to see whether this is a low probability, this is a medium probability, or this is a high probability that the risk is going to occur on your project. Now, they also have a table for consequences, or what we call impact, how to check your impact. So I'm just going to go to that table now. So in terms of the impact that the risk will have, so you have consequence level is what we call potential impact. So they have insignificant, minor, moderate, major, and critical. So just like the other one, insignificant and minor will become low probability, moderate will become medium probability, and then major and critical will become I'm mixing up. Insignificant and minor will become low impact, and then moderate will become medium impact, and major and critical will fall under your high impact that risk will have on your project or the organization. So for example, they've given some examples here in terms of health and safety risks and reputation risk. So you have under the insignificant in terms of health and safety, minor incidents not requiring first aid is insignificant. And even, and then when first aid treatment required will fall under minor impact. But when something has a moderate impact in terms of health and safety category, in the examples that you're looking at here, then there is significant but reversible disability requiring hospital visit. And when you talk about a major risk, here there is series of significant but reversible disabilities requiring hospitalization. Critical, you talk about fatality and or severe irreversible disability, to one or more persons, or permanent disabling injuries or disabling illnesses to one or more persons. An example, COVID-19. So this table, like I told you, is from a guide, from a risk management guide that was developed by United Nations, I think UNDP, yeah. So it's just there, and I saw it. I thought this was something that was very useful, and so I just copied the table exactly the way it is on the guide, to be able to add to the slide and to share also to us. It's not something that I developed as part of the slides. Now, once you have assessed the risks and you've known their probability and you've known the impact, the next thing that you want to do is to think about, how do we respond? How do we respond to these risks that we have identified? How do we respond to the risks that we've identified? Now, there are 4 risk response strategies. One of them is risk avoidance. So in risk avoidance, here you are choosing not to do, or you're deciding to do it in a different way. Okay, for example, NGOs choosing not to work in the Southeast, or let's say NGOs in Anambra are choosing not to work or be in the field 1 week within this election period. They have decided to avoid the violence that may occur during the elections. Some people have actually traveled out of the state because of fear that there may be violence. They are avoiding the violence, that may occur during that elections. So that is risk avoidance. When, let's say, for instance, you had a training that you wanted to do in a particular location, but because of maybe flood, maybe you heard that, okay, flood may happen, you decided to relocate that training from that particular location to another location. You are avoiding the risk. What you're doing in that instance is risk avoidance. And risk avoidance could be useful when you are talking about high probability and high impact. Okay, when the impact may be so high, then it's always important that you avoid the risk, by either choosing not to work within that period, or you're deciding to work in a different way. Then you also have risk transference. Risk transference here, you're shifting or sharing the risk for some aspect of the project to another party or to another person. Now, the most common example of a risk transference is insurance. So whereby when you take up an insurance policy for your vehicle, for your car, you are transferring the loss or damage of that vehicle to the insurance company. So what you're doing there is risk transference. Now, another instance, a lot of us now do not use our office vehicles to transport maybe materials or products for the project. When maybe let's say you're moving them from Abuja and say you're moving them to Kaduna, you don't want to use your vehicles. Okay, so you may want to transfer the risk to maybe a courier company. You go to a courier company and say, we have this number of things we want to take to Kaduna, but we want to pay you to take it to them, to deliver it to us, for us in Kaduna. What you're doing in that instant is that you are transferring the risk to the insurance, to the courier company, because the courier company already has insurance. And if anything happens on the way, they are going to refund or give you back those things that you gave them, because their own insurance covers for the nature of business that they are involved in. And then you have risk mitigation. Risk mitigation is something that is very popular, is one of the response strategies that everyone talks about, mitigation factors and all that. When you're mitigating, you are acting to reduce the probability and or the impact of a potential risk. Say, for instance, your project is concerned about the risks of theft of commodities, theft of farm products or farm inputs. So you've got these farm inputs that you want to use for farming, but you're concerned that they may steal it. Now, you can reduce the probability of that theft by increasing security guards or systems for the warehouse or store. You could decide to say, okay, I'm going to bring armed guard to come and guard our warehouse. You can also, or you could decide to fortify, you could decide to put CCTV cameras and all that. You can also reduce the impact by having a policy to say, we can only store in our warehouse things that will be used within 1 week period. Anything longer than 1 week should not be warehoused, because you don't want, maybe the cost of providing security will be so high. So these are some of the things that we do. And there are times where people mitigate. Let's say, for instance, you in the Northeast, you're going to implement in some locations, you're actually moving in a convoy, in a military convoy, so that in case anything happens, they can take some action to ensure the safety of aid workers. That is risk mitigation. What you're doing in that instance is risk mitigation. When you're taking steps to reduce the probability and the impact of a risk on a project, what you're doing is that you are mitigating. And then we have risks acceptance. Risk acceptance, here you're choosing to live with the risk. You've accepted the risk. Perhaps you assess the risk, you assess the probability and the impact, and you think that the risk is reasonable, and you are not going to take any action. You're choosing not to take any action about the risk. So we have people who have refused to go to IDP camps, and they are living in their respective villages and towns. Okay, they've accepted the risk. When you find that you're not taking any action and you're not doing anything about the risk, even when you knew the probability and the impact, but you think that the consequence of that risk is something that you can handle, then you have accepted the risk. Do we have any questions regarding this? Now, okay, yeah, so I'll come to you, Hannah. Now, so it's important that when you're talking about risk response, it is not always the responsibility of the project manager, senior manager, EDs, directors to be taking these decisions. So you cannot leave the whole work for your senior management to do. There are some risks that are going to fall under your tolerance level as well as your expertise area. Then it's going to be for you. For instance, if you're a logistics person and want to transfer with a courier, it's your responsibility to check. Okay, that's your responsibility, because you are the logistics lead or officer or manager for that organization. You cannot leave it out and say, it's the project manager that is supposed to do that one. No, it is under the responsibility of the logistics personnel to be able to do that. And ignorance or ignoring a risk is not an acceptable risk response. You cannot ignore. Whenever you've been told about a potentiality, you've been told about a risk that may occur, and you just ignore, you're not analyzing it, you're not thinking about what the probability or what the impact is, and you just decide to ignore that information, that is not a good response strategy. So you must not allow your risks to be ignored. You must not allow your risks to be unrecognized. And you must not allow your risks to be mismanaged. You can accept it, because when you accept a risk, you have to constantly monitor that particular risk. Okay? And you don't just wake up on your own to accept the risk. There has to be a collective decision that will be taken to ensure that the risk is accepted. So when you have to document it to say, okay, this is the meeting that we held and we decided that this risk should be accepted. Now, Hannah, your hand is still up, so go ahead and ask your question.
Thank you, Mr. Vincent, for your explanations. I think it's quite elaborate and it's clear. And I would like to find out, we're talking about risk response, and you explained 4 risk response strategies.
Yeah.
And I want to find out, my question is on item 2, which is risk transference.
Transference, okay.
Yeah, in a case whereby, for instance, let me use Plateau State. There's a crisis in Just North, and Just North is under the Northern Senatorial District, right,
Yeah.
of Plateau State. And we have 2 other, the Central and the Southern, and then Just North is within the Northern Senatorial District. And there's a crisis ongoing on, and we're supposed to monitor an activity there. So we decided now to go to the Central and then down to the Southern, down to the Central. So can we classify that as risk transference?
You didn't monitor in just not because of the crisis.
Just not, yes. So we
So
will
that would be risk avoidance.
Avoidance.
Yeah. You're choosing not to monitor in that area because of the crisis. And then you're now monitoring in central
Southern.
and south. Now,
And before coming
for
down
it
to
to be
the northern, before
for
coming
it
down to the
okay, but for now you're not doing it. You're not monitoring
yes,
because of the crisis. Now, for you to transfer, it will mean that you decided to ask a CBO that is your partner that is in those communities that they are living there to monitor and share reports with you. Instead of you living where you are to go and monitor, but you now ask the people on the ground there to monitor the activities for you. So in that way, you have now transferred the risks to them because they are from those communities where the issues are, the crisis is going on, and they understand their way in and out of the communities. But you don't. And because you're a visitor and you go there, you'll be prone. So you expose yourself to more danger than they are. So if you want to transfer in this scenario, you will say you're asking somebody who is there on the ground, who can still go about their activity, who understand the terrain, understand the situation better than you, to now do the work that you were supposed to come there to do. That way you are transferring. But when you are, you decided to go to start with just South and just Central and hoping that by the time you finish with them, the crisis may have the tension, or maybe there'll be no more crisis again. Then what you're doing is you're avoiding the crisis at that period now.
Okay, so if I get you right now, you are automatically handling that responsibility to, let's say, a third party.
Yes, transparency is when you hand over, when you share the responsibility of the risks or some aspect of the risks with a third party or another person or organization to handle for you.
All right, thank you, sir.
All right. Okay. All right, so we'll just continue now. Now, another important thing that you do is that you want to constantly monitor your risk, because risks do change. Risks do change. There are times where at the designing of your project, when you're writing the proposal, some of the things that you discovered were risks may no longer be risks again. You know, some that you thought were that were high with high probability and high impact may no longer become high probability and high impact on the project. And so you need to constantly look at this your risk response plan, and you also need to discuss risks in your project meetings. It's very important. Risk monitoring will help you to keep track of progress towards resolving the risks in the risk response plan. So you've developed a plan, a response strategy to say, this we are going to avoid, this risks we are going to transfer, this other risks we are going to mitigate, and this one we are going to accept. You need to constantly revisit them to check to see what is the status of this risk. Is it still a high probability? Is it still a low probability? Is it still a medium probability? So you want to, find out time. And like I stated here, that some of the more obvious times to revisit the list of identified risks and the risk response plan include in preparation for major decision points. So in project management, we have what we call decision gates. Maybe to say after submitting a proposal, before you implement, you need to look at your risk response plan and say, do you think that this risk response strategy that we share to the donor is still valid? What is a new situation or information about this risk? And so whenever there has been an audit, for instance, you did an OCA, organizational capacity assessment. For instance, you did a SWOT analysis, or you audited your systems, or you reviewed your plan and you reviewed the project with your partner. It's also important for you to look at your risk response plan and think about, is this plan still valid? You know, the way we said, well, these risks, are they still valid? Has something changed? Because there are some risks that you've identified early that may no longer be risks as the project moves on. So there are some risks I've identified early that may no longer be risks as the project moves on. So it's very, very important for you to always review your monitor your risks and look at what needs to be done. And if, for instance, you had maybe the project itself was reviewed by the donor. For instance, you were supposed to be working on 3 states, and then they now added an additional state for you to work on. You're supposed to be working in 20 states, and they now added additional states, additional location, or they increased the budget for you. They increased the time. Maybe there was an extension on the project. You need to look at your risks and say, the risk that assessment that we did was supposed to elapse maybe for November 2021. Now we are going to stay on the project up till June 2022. Is this risk still valid? Or is there something that we should be doing about this risk? So those are the things that, some of the things that you want to be doing and the decisions that you want to be taking at every point in time to monitor this risk. Now, somebody said I should go back and talk about mitigation. So I did say, Beatrice, I did say that mitigation, you are acting to reduce the probability or impact of a risk, whereby you are taking steps. For instance, a common example, for instance, would be that you drive a car and you're putting on your seatbelt. Why do you put on your seatbelt? It reduces the probability of you being killed in an event of an accident. But the seatbelt does not stop the car, you know, stop you from having an accident or being involved in an accident. But you have a higher chance of reducing the impact, maybe of maybe someone's head hitting the dashboard or the windshield, or you know, and so on. But that the seatbelt protects you. It doesn't give you 100% safety, but it protects you. That's what mitigation is. You're acting to reduce, you're taking steps to reduce the probability of the risk and the impact it will have on your project, on your team, if it does occur. But you are not in any way stopping the risk or eliminating it from happening, but you're just going ahead with your work. But you say, okay, I will take some steps to ensure that if the risk occurs, I'm not going to be affected so much by the impact of the risk. Again, I want to talk about something very important here, which is contingency planning. It's very important to bear this in mind, because even the best laid out plans do fail. No matter how wonderful your plans are, plans do fail. You may have the best risk response or risk management plan in place, and something could happen and it fails. So it's important that you want to establish contingency plans for projects or activities that are of vital importance, and also where there is more than one possibility that this activity will not be completed on time. Okay, so it's very important that for all your project activities, there has to, a contingency plan talks about a plan B. So what if in spite of everything that we did and the risks do occur, what do we do? How do we ensure that we are not caught up, you know, by these risks that are going to occur? So you need to be able to identify alternative resources in case something happens, especially let's say you have a risk of staff attrition. So what if your staff leave you in the middle of the project? What do? You need to begin to think about that. What do we do in case staff leave? And you say you want to accept it that, well, this industry where we are, people leave, it's a very fluid, very mobile sector. People are always leaving the organization. Yes, so we accept it as a risk, no problem. But what if it happens? What do you do? Okay, so you would also be able to identify resources that you may need to maintain your processes. Because a lot of times, as some of us may have already known, donors do not fund certain areas of our budget. Okay, donors may not be interested in funding some administrative costs of the project. So how do you sustain the organization? You know, how do you ensure that the organization does not collapse even when you have a project that is running, that is going on, but the organization itself is in dire need of resources because the project is not paying for some very essential services that the organization requires. So it's what I want you to realize is that you need to have a plan B just in case something happens. What do? You know, there is a saying that do not put your eggs in one basket. Don't put your eggs in one basket. It's very, very important. And even in project management, it's also vitally, vitally important that you consider that as well. What do we do? Just in case something happens, what do we then do? Now, a tool that will be very useful, and which I know some of you are already using it and some of you are quite familiar with it, that we use for risk management is the risk register. So the risk register is a very, very important tool that you need to have. So it has a column where you talk about the risk name. The risk name here, you are describing the risk itself that that you are looking at managing. You've identified the risks, you're now describing them. You describe the risks. And then the second column here, you have probability of the risks occurring and the impact. The third column talks about the impact that the risk could have and the risk score, you know, the total risks that you are facing with. And then it has another column for a response strategy and then the person responsible. So it's always important in project management that you clarify ownership, clarify who is responsible for carrying out a particular task in your organization or in your project. Don't leave it to teams. You say the team will do it. Within the team, who is going to take responsibility? There has to be somebody whose responsibility it is to manage certain risks. Now, if you look at this risk register, if you look at it here, the probability here is measured over 10, because for those of us who do statistics, you know that probability is always on a scale of 1 to 10. So on a scale of 1 to 10, what is the probability that this risk is going to occur? And then because probability is also measured on a scale of 1 to 10, we are also measuring impact on a scale of 1 to 10. So what is the impact that this risk will have if it does occur on a scale of 1 to 10? And the risk score is gotten by multiplying probability by the impact. And for each risk, you need to develop a risk response strategy, whether you want to mitigate, whether you want to avoid, whether you want to transfer, or whether you want to accept that particular risk that you have identified. Do we have any questions so far? So I would also like to get comments. I'd like to get feedback from people, your thoughts. So I'm asking everyone to unmute. Yeah, Blessing, you can unmute yourself, please, and go ahead. Blessing, go ahead.
All right. Vincent, good afternoon. Good afternoon, everybody.
Thank you, Blessing.
Good afternoon.
Okay, so just I have a question I would like to just throw more light on.
Okay.
Talking about the risk register, looking at this. So if we in an organization, if a project can work on developing their risk register, to be able to identify risks in their respective implementing sites or location. I think, can it still go for the risk, you talked about risk framework. So can the risk registers go for it? rather than having to go through the details of developing a separate framework for risk assessment.
Okay, okay. Thank you very much. So now, the register is part of a comprehensive framework that you have. So the risk register just helps you to monitor these risks, to know whether actions have been taken to have. But having a framework for risk management, it gives you like a comprehensive approach that organizations need to take, or a project needs to take, from when and how they will identify the risks, how they do analysis and their assessment, up to the point where you're developing a risk response strategy. And sometimes it even involves a risk management policy. So there will be a policy on how you manage risks on the project, because the reason why you need that framework is that a lot of times this risk management, even when we are writing proposals, people find it difficult in being able to identify the risks for those particular projects. But if you have a framework in place, for instance, it will guide you. It will now serve like a mini standard operational procedure, like an SOP for risk, to say, okay, this is the first step that we need to have. This is the first step that we need to have. It's like you're having a resource mobilization strategy or a framework. It still doesn't stop you from developing a work plan, from that your framework. Or if you have, let's say you have like a strategic plan for the organization, it doesn't stop you from having a work plan for a particular project. But that gives you like the holistic picture of all the risks that is going to affect you. Because remember, you may also have security risks. You may also have organizational risks itself that are bigger than the particular project. So you want to be able to have that big framework on how we manage risks that we face per project, because if not, you find a situation whereby there are going to be different projects will come up with their own different risk register and different approach. There will not be uniformity of approaches and uniformity of tools. But if there is a framework in place, it will serve as a guidance, irrespective of who your donor is and who your funder is. With that framework, you'll be able to tailor tools, for the organization and how things are being done as an organization. Yeah. So I think that we still need that framework, even when we have a register. But that document, I'm going to put it on the Telegram. That document is just a 46-page document. It provides further insight regarding risk management. I just stumbled on it and I thought that, yeah, it's a document that people should have. It's a UN document. The way UN uses it will just help people who really want to go further, maybe becoming certified risk manager, because there's a certification for risk management. So if people want to become risk management experts, they can take that up. So Hannah, yeah. Hannah, okay. You can go ahead.
All right, thank you, Mr. Vincent.
Yeah.
Now that we don't have any donor asking us to write proposals, there's no call for proposals as such, will it be too late for us to have a risk register from our ongoing projects?
No. It's not late. Sorry, it's not late. Now, these things are not just for donors. It's about you as an organization having the right processes and systems in place for yourself. So it's not late. You don't need to wait for the donor. I think that it even when the donor visits you to do maybe an assessment, if they want to a pre-award assessment, and they begin to even see that you have some of these tools and templates and systems in place, the way they rate you is higher than when you don't even have at all. And that's what I've seen organizations whereby they got the grant, and then the donors came to do a pre-assessment, a pre-award assessment. And look, before they come to do an assessment, the final assessment, where they are looking at your finance systems and all that, that means that you've already gotten that grant. But do you know that for this particular organization, they didn't get that project simply because they failed the assessment. Some of the things that what the donors saw on ground, where there were like no systems at all, and the donors felt that no, that we are going to have compliance issues with these individuals if we allow them. If we fund these people, we may lose our money. And so they didn't award them that grant. So in spite of having a beautiful proposal, you may still not get the money if you do not have some of these systems that we're talking about. And for those of us from local organizations, I've always said that, look, think about localization. It's a big opportunity. It's what is happening now. Today, local organizations are leading grant award and implementation, while international organizations are now becoming sub-recipient from local organizations. For every local international organization operating in Nigeria, they have to partner with a local organization. But the big problem that these international NGOs have is that many of our local NGOs lack capacity, and we are unwilling to develop systems and processes in place. We want money, but to get money, you need systems. And so, Hannah, I would advise that you begin to talk with your team and develop a risk register. There are various formats of risk register online. And I always say, look, the easiest way, go to toolsfordev.org and you're going to get it. Tools for development. There are lots of templates there on Excel, on PowerPoint, on Microsoft Word, for virtually everything that you want to do. Even risk register is there. You can just develop it and look at it and now adapt it to suit your operating environment. So thank you so much, Hannah. So Bitros, you can go ahead.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, looking at risk analysis or risk management,
Yeah.
The points you mentioned earlier on these 4 thematics area, avoidance, mitigation, and what have you. As a local NGO practitioner, we've done a lot of projects, also having in cognizance, because they do not ask us what is the risk assessment and what are the mitigation strategy in place.
Yeah.
Yes, it's quite agree, sir. The local NGO is like a corridor for staffs to just come and move, and there's a high staff turnover, doing the risk analysis, getting the risk register, and what have you. Still, we are faced with risks of partners, staff living at a particular point. We've also tried to make sure we work with teams. Thank God you made mention of assigning key person to take responsibility, not leaving it to the team, so that you can have somebody to ask a question if need be. Now, putting all these things into cognizance, what can you advise or any tips that you can give to us to also guide against, after putting this register, somebody has been taken through the training, they are working as a team and is responsible, and this issue of staff turnover comes in and somebody has to step in. How do we guide against such a risk occurrence?
Yeah, my brother, I think that staff turnover is nothing. There's nothing you can do about. Even in the United Nations, all right, people still leave the UN. But what I always tell people is that you need to be able to institutionalize things, in that irrespective of who leaves, the system still exists. So if we begin to move beyond just when we talk about capacity, and then all you're talking about is developing the humans, but the systems, and you don't have systems, you don't have processes within the organization, then the organization always loses out every time an experienced staff leaves. So ensure that as little as ensuring that, because it's easier to manage it when your organization is not is still small in terms of personnel size. It's easier to manage things like this, in that whenever there is a training, there has to be a step down for as many people as can. That also ensures that every other person who couldn't attend the training also benefits for that particular training as well. And then there has to be SOPs. SOPs are very important. Standard operational procedures are very important. By having these processes in place, it ensures that even when somebody leaves, another person can see the process of how that person that left usually does his or her work, and I can pick up from there. I used to tell people, I use an example and say, look, if you've gone to a fast food restaurant, it's not one person that bakes those meat pie. It's not one person that bakes a cake. They could have two chefs, two bakers inside one restaurant. But irrespective of whoever is on duty, the taste of that meat pie is always the same. And that means that there's a system, there is a process that whoever is on duty must follow this process. It doesn't, you have your own style of doing things, but this is the organizational style. So that when that baker leaves and a customer comes, the customer should not come and say, this meat pie that I ate today is better than the meat pie I ate yesterday. If people complain like that, that means that there is a problem in your system. Irrespective of whether it's on duty, whether you're night, your day, the situation should always be the same. And people should not tell that a particular pest staff is not on duty. That is why the organization is like this. So if you're able to do that, putting those kind of systems in place, using this example of the restaurant, like I told you, and say, okay, how can we ensure that practices have been institutionalized? That the way people are writing proposal, we have it like an SOP. We have it that all those documents that they will use, we have it in a folder that everybody can access. So by the time you begin to create folders, create systems, create templates, and ensure that everybody within the organization or that particular project knows how to use those templates as long as it's their core function area. Another thing is that you also need to ensure that not one person knows how to do a particular role. If not, when one person leaves, then there will be a gap. If you have only one finance person, and then you need to begin to think about taking an intern or a volunteer who will come and understudy that finance person. So that if the finance person leaves you, then you will not start from square one again. That's just the system. If you have been the one who is the one project officer, you need to also mentor another person to say, okay, let me mentor another project officer. It's like, I could say, for instance, after all, these Zoom classes I'm doing, I'm not charging for it. I could keep everything that I know to myself. But I look, it's in recreating other people. It's in sharing that we have systems in place. That's why I'm doing this, to say, okay, as much as I can, whatever I know, and I'm also talking to other people. And like, for instance, next week, somebody else is going to take us on M&E. So it's not beyond me. I'm trying to galvanize people to come in. That's the way it works in organization. That whatever you have, mentor another person to be able to do the same thing that you're doing. That's the way. If not, people will leave you. You cannot stop them. It's against the law to stop you from leaving. If you put all those clauses in contracts and say you must work with me for 2 years, 3 years before you go, it's wrong. It's not. It's not illegal. It's a legal thing when you now begin to force people to stay. People cannot be compelled to stay against their will. But we must put systems in place to ensure that wherever people live, the gap should not be there like that because somebody else has left. So please, I would like to stop here. It's already 5 minutes to 1 p.m. I don't want to exit 1 o'clock, but we still have just 5 minutes. I just have, next week we are doing M&E, and we have somebody who is also part of this meeting who is going to take the M&E. And then I want to appeal for something. We are collecting impact stories. This training, the masterclass is going to end for the year on November 27th. That's the last class for the year. But we are developing a website, and we are also going to put all these recordings on YouTube so that people can have access to them. But I want to know if these things have been impacting you, and we are collecting impact stories. We want a video, 1 minute, 2 minute video. If you would like to share, tell us your story, how you benefited from this masterclass. I would just want to be able to see. I think that it's better if people hear from other people. If you're willing to share, I'll be so grateful if I hear from you. If you want me to do the video for you, maybe I'll set up a Zoom meeting, just you and I, and record it. I'll be so grateful. If you want to use your phone to do it, we just want to hear from participants how they benefited, if it's ever helped you in any way, so that I'll be able to encourage other people to keep joining. That's just my appeal. We are collecting impact stories from now to the end so that we can just move on with this. So we're uploading all the videos to our YouTube for the year. All the videos for this year will be on the YouTube channel we've created and the Facebook page. So I really appreciate everyone. I really want to thank you. I know it's never easy. People are here. There are matches going on. There are weddings. There are activities. very busy Saturdays, markets, yet you are here. So thank you all so very, very much for